you guys to start.
Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. So thanks for having us, guys. We'll give you a couple of minutes to go to one of these URLs on your phone or your laptop. This is going to be kind of an interactive presentation, and your participation is much appreciated. So we've got 3 URLs up there on the screen right now. Whatever your favorite genre of music is, if it's country, go to the jss.ma/country URL. If it's rock, go to the rock URL, or if it's R&B, choose the R&B URL. And there'll be a form there that you guys can fill out that'll help make our presentation a little bit more interesting, I think.
Cool.
So we give you a couple of minutes to do that.
If you're a big fan of banjo music, I apologize. The closest thing is country.
I guess it's okay.
Give you guys about 1 more minute.
Poate dacă dai F11 se face full screen. Nu?
Nu.
Yeah.
All right, last call. If you're going to participate, hit one of these URLs real quick. Otherwise, I think we're going to go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
JSS and marketing automation. So this is a presentation that Rick and I did at Sitecore Symposium last year in August. Speaking now, this is Corey Smith. I'm a Sitecore MVP of technology and independent consultant, and I'll be presenting with my good friend Rick Bauer, the JSS Gold Master.
Yes, I am Rick Bauer. I am. You can find me on Twitter at Sitecordial. I am a Sitecore strategist MVP. I have been for about 3 years, and on Sitecore since version 7. I work for a company called Proficient, and happy to be here. So looking forward to talking to you guys about this.
Yep, and we've got our Twitter handles at the bottom of every slide, Sitecore and Sitecordial. So tweet at us. We like to hear from you and get your thoughts. All right. So JavaScript services and marketing automation. This presentation, again, is one that we did at Sitecore Symposium, as you can see on every single slide. And really, we put this presentation together because Sitecore was doing a general availability release of JSS at Symposium in October. And what we wanted to do is showcase the fact that JSS is ready for you to start building your applications on. It's a full mature product, and whenever you use it, you don't give up anything, right? You don't give up marketing automation, you don't give up personalization. Any of the stuff that people love Sitecore for is all compatible with JSS and easy to leverage. And that's kind of what this presentation was born from. Can I get a quick show of hands? I can't see the entire room. How many of you guys have actually used JSS? Is that just one?
Just one.
Oh, okay, cool. Exciting. Yeah, JSS is a lot of fun.
But we are learners, so don't worry.
And at our last user group, a lot of people were interested in JSS, and they were quite how it works and so on. And that's why I think about you to have this quick presentation, because you have the experience on this.
Sure. Rick, do you have anything to add?
I will add that, so just kind of going through what you're going to see here, this is definitely developer focused, but the reason there's the 2 of us and you have a technology MVP and a strategy MVP is to really show the completeness of solution. You'll probably hear me repeat that phrase, but the one thing that we've noticed when working with JSS is just the the sheer native feel, the speed that you gain as not just a user of the site, but as a content author. So we're going to be showing kind of that, where I'm the as you're seeing the front stage here, I'm not, like this is, the crowd facing piece of the site and, the design and everything. Corey's the backstage where all the parties are happening, and he's the one that, is kind of having all that fun, behind closed doors and late at night and letting it all hang out. So that's we'll kind of put those two pieces together to show how this all works in conjunction, gets that full picture.
Yep. So before we dive into JSS, let's talk a little bit about the history of rendering engines in Sitecore. So if you guys have been doing Sitecore for a long time, you've probably come across and are familiar with XSLT. You may love it, but you probably hate it. And then, of course, web forms. Hopefully nobody's doing new sites on this. I know that there are still a lot of maintenance sites out there. I'm on one myself right now that's doing web forms. And then, of course, there's MVC. And MVC is kind of the latest and greatest. And that's what everybody should be building their sites on. Everybody loves MVC. However, at the end of the day, as far as your clients are concerned and as far as the visitors to your sites are concerned, it doesn't really matter which of these three you use, because they're all server-side rendering engines, right? Doesn't matter if you're using XSLT or MVC. At the end of the day, Sitecore on your server is generating an HTML document and sending that up to your users. And that's fine. It's worked really well for us for a long time, but JSS comes on the scene to kind of change this model. And this is one of the big selling points, I think, of JSS is for your users, because JSS, instead of doing server-side rendering like MVC, XSLT, and web forms, does client-side rendering. So instead of Sitecore generating an HTML document and sending that to your users, now with JSS, what's going to happen is Sitecore is going to use something called the layout service to generate a JSON model of your pages. And then JSS is actually in the browser going to render that into HTML. And through a lot of cool tricks, that actually makes a lot faster, a lot more of a native experience that you'll be able to tell right away, right? So if you take a site that's built on MVC and take that exact same site and re-implement it on JSS and play with them both in your browser, you're going to choose the JSS site every time because it feels so much faster. Clicking around is really quick. It just feels like a site that should be built in 2019. And I think Rick commented on that earlier. I mean, that's the first thing he noticed whenever I put that demo site in his hands. He's like, wow, this thing is really fast. I can feel it. Your grandmother could feel it too, right? She doesn't know the difference between server-side and client-side rendering, but it's that noticeable. And it's for this reason that I honestly think some people have disagreed with me, but I think within the next couple of years, we're going to see kind of a transition where, today we're joking and saying, hey, don't use web forms. Don't use XSLT as your rendering engines anymore. I think we're going to be saying the same thing about MVC. I feel like we should be saying that today, but it's going to take a little bit of time for people to get ramped up on JSS. But I really think that within the next couple of years, people are going to be saying, yep, if you're building a new Sitecore site, you need to be doing that on JSS. Don't use MVC anymore, because that's just the way that sites should be being built in 2019 and beyond. Anything to add on to that, Rick?
I not too much. I would just say that the one thing I would add is, if somebody's, a hiring manager or anything like that, it doesn't mean that you can just hire an HTML developer. You still need a skill set, but to replace, it's not a replacement for that level. But I mean, if you're looking, you certainly can open up the hiring pool. I would say with this, you can basically, reach into JavaScript developers and such for Sitecore.
Yeah. So again, this is just a new rendering engine. That's what JSS is at the end of the day. Instead of building your components using controller renderings or user controls with web forms, now you're able to leverage Angular, Vue, or React and their component models to build your components purely in JavaScript. So right now, JSS has full feature parity for these three frameworks. You choose whatever your team is most comfortable with or whatever your client prefers. Angular, Vue, React, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's not like you're going to give up something if you choose Angular over React. All the same features are there. You get all the same great stuff. So yeah, just choose whichever one you're familiar with. I chose React just because that's the first thing that the JSS team supported, and that's what I built this site on. And honestly, I was a little bit nervous coming into this as a purely backend dev. Like, wow, how am I going to start picking up React and build on it quickly? And surprisingly, it's very easy. React is easy to pick up. I thought it was a lot more fun actually to develop on than MVC. So I'd say to any backend developers in the crowd who are like, oh, I don't want to move away from controller renderings or learn, this is going to be too much. Don't be worried. This is pretty exciting stuff and easy to pick up. But I think kind of what Rick was saying, the interesting thing about bringing JSS in is it's going to allow us to start working with a whole new group of people that I feel like haven't really been empowered on Sitecore before, and that's the front-end developers. Every front-end developer that I've ever spoken to that's had to do Sitecore development complains nonstop about having to use Visual Studio. And one of the killer things about JSS is it actually lets us do development without Visual Studio, without Sitecore, and without Windows through something called disconnected mode. So this is kind of JSS's killer feature. Basically what disconnected mode does is it uses Node to kind of simulate Sitecore, and you can develop, again, a full-featured site without Sitecore at all. It's super fast, it's super easy, runs on Mac OS, runs Linux, runs Windows, wherever. So that makes the front-end developers happier because, right, a lot of them like to work on Macs. They can do that natively. They don't have to run a VM. And all this can be done in VS Code, so you don't have to use Visual Studio. And whenever you're building these sites, I mean, again, you're not building a static mock-up of the site. This isn't just HTML. You're actually building out your components, simulating the data that would be coming from Sitecore. And whenever you've got the site built out, you can deploy that to Sitecore and then start taking advantage of things like personalization, marketing automation, etc. So disconnected mode, it's not a full Sitecore instance, right? All the personalization rules that we buy Sitecore for and the marketing automation and all that stuff, it's not going to work in disconnected mode. You're just working with content, you're just building your components, but it makes it really fast to prototype your sites. So I wanted to take a second to demo that to you guys and show you what that looks like. So let's see. You can see here on the right side, I've got Visual Studio Code open. And can you guys see this? Should I zoom in a little bit or?
It's fine.
Okay, it's fine. So you can see here on the left side, I've got the exact same site that you guys just interacted with, and it's running on localhost 3000. So this is actually running through Node.js. This isn't running through IIS. And we can kind of click around and you see it's basically the same site. Except for right here, we can't render the music form. But this is the same site, and this is running 100% in disconnected mode. Sitecore is not involved at all. And whenever you're doing your development in disconnected mode, I mean, this is kind of what your workspace looks like. You're not using Visual Studio, you can use VS Code. And Sitecore actually provides 3 starter kits, one for Angular, one for React, and one for Vue. And you're expected to build your JSS sites on top of it, right? So we've all heard, don't use Habitat as a starter kit, don't use Habitat Home as a starter kit. The starter kits for Angular, React, and Vue are true starter kits. You're expected to build your sites on it because it comes with so much stuff out of the box that you don't want to have to reinvent. And this is what it looks like for React. The folder structure is going to be exactly the same. I don't have time to really go into depth about, you know, exactly how all this stuff works. It's pretty interesting. If you're interested in that, go on YouTube and look up JSS and Helix by a good friend of ours, Jean-Francois Leroux from Coveo. He actually did a presentation on how all this stuff works at Sitecore Symposium last year. So check that out on YouTube, JSS and Helix, if you want to kind of get more details. But what I really want to focus on is how you're actually mocking the content, right? So We don't have Sitecore involved, so we don't have items. So how are we working with content without Sitecore? And you're actually going to do that through YAML files. So if you're familiar with Unicorn or if you're familiar with Rainbow, this is almost the same format. It's not exactly the same. It's not compatible with Unicorn, but this is going to feel very familiar to you. And you basically build up your items using YAML. So you can see it's here under this routes folder that you kind of declare your items as YAML files. And this is going to look a lot like the content tree, right? So en.yaml, this is the language version of my homepage. You can see it's kind of the root node under routes. And then I've got a rock page, the en version of it. And then under rock, I've got a survey page, et cetera, et cetera. But if we take a deeper look at this en.yaml, the homepage, you can see it's got fields. So page title, that's pretty normal. And this is a field for like the whole item. And then where it really gets interesting is placeholders. So you can have a header, main, and this is where you kind of declare what components you want to appear. So content block. This is basically your presentation details. But what's really cool about this and what makes disconnected mode so awesome is how fast it is. So we can say, thank you for having us here in the content. I'm just going to hit Control S, and then through the power of hot reloading, bam, look at that. On the left side, it reloads. And prototype.
Not exactly Sitecore speed.
No, it's not Sitecore speed at all. You guys all know, if you're working on a regular Sitecore instance and you do this, you got to publish, you got to wait, blah, 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 go get coffee. But it's this fast across the board, right? Like it's not just content, it's editing your components as well. So, I mean, if I were to go in here and make a change to one of the components, like the header, we can just put anything in here. You'll see that, yep, look at that. That header got updated instantly. So this is going to make prototyping your site super fast, getting something ready for your clients, for your content authors to see like, what is this site going to look like in production before you actually deploy it and get slowed down by Sitecore. Yeah, so that's disconnected mode. I think this is really going to change the way that we develop sites on JSS, and I'm really excited about it.
And Corey, just before we kind of go to the connected mode, one thing that is important to know, I'm doing air quotes right now, the catch is it's not really a two-way street. So, you can work here in disconnected mode, and once you move, push over to, and publish this and, get, set it up in Sitecore, and the marketers, for example, start setting up their marketing definitions and everything, you can't pull it back into disconnected mode and work on it there, at least not right now. So that is kind of the big catch. You can set up, you can prototype, you can do all the front end development, and then move it over to Sitecore, and then from there on, it's basically Sitecore.
Right. So this is kind of a good segue over to Rick. As we've said, there's no Sitecore in disconnected mode, none of your personalization, etc. So at some point, you're going to have your site prototype built out in disconnected mode, and you're going to say, all right, we need to get this in the hand of our content authors so that they can start doing the personalization and content entry. There's an import process that lets you take all of these YAML files that you've built out and actually push them into Sitecore as items. The import process will generate templates for you. It'll generate content items, media, yada, yada, yada. It does that all automatically. But as Rick said, there's no going back. So once you push all that stuff into Sitecore, it's kind of expected that from that point on, you're going to start doing development against the Sitecore instance and leave disconnected mode behind. But once you do that, then Rick can get his hands on your stuff and start doing cool stuff. So Rick, you want to talk about what happens when you move to connected mode a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, so everything you've been seeing, with JSS is not something the marketers, like myself and anyone that does what I do, will really even be aware of, right? I mean, it's other than the sheer speed of the system, but that was definitely a noticeable piece. But otherwise, I'm still working as a marketer, as a content author and a marketer. So again, this is just to show, everything that I expect as a Sitecore, the user of the Sitecore system, from a marketing standpoint, is still available, built on JSS. So first of all, I kind of want to start from, get back to the basics on what was going on here and talk about the experience that you just had. And we're going to step through this, and we'll kind of use me as guideposts as we kind of come through this. But when you came to the site and you chose your genre, you'll notice that at the top, he's putting in the country, you see the campaign ID. That was something that was generated by the fact that a campaign was defined in the marketing control panel in Sitecore. So when you chose that URL, it basically applied one of these campaign IDs to it, and it's simply creating the campaign. It creates the ID that gets appended to the URL. You'll see that right here, that campaign link, and then that's just something I can give a name, but I can also apply some taxonomy to that. So if you scroll up there, Corey, actually just in that campaign as well, you'll see these classifications. So all of those are items that are created on the left-hand side. You'll see that taxonomy structure, and I call this the marketing taxonomy just to differentiate from a web taxonomy. But it's basically, classifications that can be set up. So it's anything that I want as a marketer. I can apply, I want an event, I want to have symposium, I want to have it at a local Sitecore user group, I want to hold it at Akshay's house, and we can apply images and such that basically will then show up in reporting if we choose to have that tied together. So this is all just these taxonomy pieces. I kind of just dumb it down to say tags, and these tags then drive Sitecore analytics. So now when you came to the site, you basically instantly came through as a campaign, set up a campaign ID. With those campaigns, we applied the taxonomy to it, and those facets and everything started to drive analytics. So that's all fine and good from an analytics standpoint, but then there's a point where we want to, as marketers, learn more about you, and that's where we want to start to look at a form. And so you'll see the form here on the page, but you'll remember when Corey was kind of in disconnected mode, it was showing, marketing form here. Currently, Sitecore Forms, the new Sitecore Forms is fantastic. It's drag and drop. It's a nice tool to use, but it is not supported by JSS. So there's no JSS support for Sitecore Forms. And that's where Corey had to come in and have a little bit of fun, not just with creating the forms, but all the elements that come with creating a form, not using the Sitecore form tool.
Right.
So just again, a guidepost here just to kind of give you an idea of what you've been through, and then we'll let Corey talk about forms here and kind of check in as we move forward.
Yep. So as Rick mentioned, again, in the current version of Sitecore 9.0 and 9.1, there is no Sitecore form support in JSS at all, period. Right. So if you guys are building a JSS application on 9.0 or 9.1 and you want to build forms, you're going to have to do that from scratch. Sitecore form support is coming to JSS in 9.2. They announced that at SugCon last month. So that'll be really exciting. But until then, you're kind of on your own to build your own forms. And that's okay. It's not that tough. It's a shame that you can't reuse the Sitecore forms at this point. But I want to talk to you about some of the challenges I ran into with building my own forms in JSS that you may run into as well. So the first one is working with the analytics cookie, right? So this is one of the most important things in Sitecore is the analytics cookie. This is the heart of how personalization and marketing automation and all that works. And if you've done MVC, you've seen this on a layout, undoubtedly, the visitor identification component, right? So you put this on your layout, and Sitecore will send a cookie to the user to identify them, and it'll also watch their mouse movements to figure out if they're a robot. JSS has a very similar component. So in Vue and React, that component looks like this. It does exactly the same thing as the one in MVC. Angular has one too, but the semantics of it are a bit different, so I don't include it on this slide. You don't ever really have to use this because if you're using the JSS starter kits, this is just going to be included in the layout by default. But I just call it out because it does exist and it is similar. But what I want to talk about is where you have to be careful. So let's look at one of the things that you're going to do with your users on their forms. you're going to try to identify them, right? That's the thing that marketers want you to do is if you've got a form on a page, get somebody's email address, get somebody's identification information, and identify them in Sitecore using the tracker current session identify as. So this isn't tricky code. This is normal. We probably all used this to identify people before. But where it gets tricky is whenever you're actually sending this data from JSS to your controllers, right? So this is just a API controller that takes a post with some form data. And on the JavaScript side, this is what your code might look like to post that data. Here I'm using something called fetch. So this is included by default with JavaScript and later versions. So this kind of takes the place of like jQuery.ajax, right? If you've ever used that before. But one thing that you got to be careful of is this line right here. If you don't include this in your REST calls, it doesn't matter if you're doing a get or a post or a put, whatever. If you don't include this line that I have right here, credential same origin, the cookies will not get sent to the server, and that's going to create some interesting problems for you, as Rick and I found out. So Rick and I, whenever we were building the site, we ran into this issue where he would go and submit the music form, and I could see him get identified on the server, but whenever he would browse around the site, it wasn't responding to his choices, right? So he would pick jazz, and none of the jazz personalization was happening. After a long afternoon, Rick drank lots of scotch. I scratched my head a lot. We found out that without this line right here, yeah, no cookies are getting sent to the server, and Sitecore doesn't work properly. So just keep this in mind. I mean, you don't have to write this down, but if you're ever starting to use fetch, there's also another library out there. Its name's escaping me at the moment, but yeah, if you're working in JavaScript using fetch, just keep this in mind whenever you're working with the server and sending data back to it, that you probably need to put credentials same origin on there, and you can go look this up. Yeah, because that's the only way to get the cookies to go across the wire. So keep that in mind. Hope that saves you some time.
It was only half a bottle of Frog.
Next thing is CSRF. So cross-site request forgeries. This is something that used to be on the OWASP top 10 list of security vulnerabilities on websites. So if you're not familiar with it, OWASP top 10 is just a list that gets published every few years that says, hey, these are the top 10 vulnerabilities that we've identified on websites this year. Again, this used to be on that top 10 list. It's gone off in the past few years because a lot of frameworks have introduced mitigations for it. And MVC is one of them that has mitigation with the HTML anti-forgery token. So if you want to prevent cross-site request forgeries or CSRF attacks on your forms, it's pretty easy in MVC. Whenever you declare your form in your view, you just put this HTML anti-forgery token component in there. And then on your controller, all you have to do is use this authorize attribute validate anti-forgery token, and you're done, right? This is going to prevent cross-site request forgeries to your site for that form. Works pretty easily. It's nice. The problem is it doesn't work at all with JSS out of the box. If you want to use API controllers, for example, there's no anti-forgery token support in API controllers out of the box either. So if this is something that you're going to be doing and you're going to be building forms, you need to be protecting them with anti-forgery tokens. And I've done the legwork for you. You can go check out this blog post that I wrote that shows you how to leverage all that stuff in JSS. If we were to talk about that on the phone or through a presentation, it would be its own separate presentation because it's quite a bit of work. But again, I want to stress that if you're building custom forms, you need to be protecting them with anti-forgery tokens. In 9.2, when the Sitecore form support comes, all of those are protected by anti-forgery tokens out of the box, so you don't have to worry about it. But for custom forms, please protect them. And last but not least, this is probably the coolest thing that JSS comes with aside from disconnected mode is GraphQL. Can you tell us what that is, Rick?
I'm happy to, Corey. So this was developed internally by Facebook in 2012 and then released in 2015. You might be aware of it, but GraphQL is the world's best select statement, self-proclaimed, I think. And it's an open source data query and manipulation language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling queries with existing data. And one of my favorite parts of this demo. So.
Yeah. So, I'm going to take a little stab at Sitecore and say that sometimes with Sitecore, I feel a bit behind the times, focusing only on Sitecore, right? For example, MVC came out from Microsoft, I think in 2008 or 2009. Didn't even get introduced to Sitecore until 2014. So people who were doing Sitecore development had no MVC exposure likely. Same thing with JSS. I mean, React, Angular, Vue, we've been hearing about those things for years, and it's not until the end of 2018 that we kind of get that in our hands. GraphQL is new, and Sitecore is already adopting it, and we can use it. And that's what got me really excited, because everybody's talking about this. Front-end developers, back-end developers, everybody. And we're going to be able to get our hands on it and start understanding it. I'm going to give you guys one of the most simple use cases for it when working with JSS. And it's basically kind of acting as a controller and reshaping your data. So you don't have to pay attention to the content on here.
Write this down.
Yeah, don't write this down. Don't pull out your glasses. But what we're trying to show you is how this can be used. So whenever we were setting up that form, the music form, we needed some way to kind of simulate submit actions from Sitecore forms, right? Whenever you submit a form, Rick wanted a goal and he wanted an outcome to be triggered for you, and there's no way to do that out of the box. So what I did is on the music forms data source, I put two multi-list fields, one of them for selecting goals and one of them for selecting outcomes. And then, so whenever Rick was setting up that music form, he could select all the goals he wanted triggered, and he could select all the outcomes he wanted triggered whenever that form was submitted. What was interesting is the first time that I actually wired that up and started looking at the data in JSS, this is all the data that came back from Sitecore for one outcome. And this is all the data that came back from Sitecore for one goal. And if you've worked with XConnect at all, and you've triggered outcomes or goals, you know that you only need one piece of data to do that with XConnect, and that's the ID. So not only is this a waste of bandwidth, but Rick also has a lot of taxonomy and other backend information set up on those outcomes and goals that are just unnecessarily getting sent across the wire. Like the picture he chose for his goals would get sent across the wire. We don't want people to know that he chose the sax icon. In MVC, if you were doing the same implementation, this is an easy problem to solve, because you use your controller and you can, strip your goals and your outcomes down to just their IDs and work with it that way. But with JSS, there's no controller, right? There's no way for you to really intercept through code, like, what this data is, except for GraphQL. So GraphQL actually lets you tell JSS, hey, when you're sending outcomes and you're sending goals up to the client, don't send all that data, just send the IDs. And it's pretty easy to do. So I'll switch over to Sitecore and give you guys a demo of that. So we've got the content editor open here. And let me give it a refresh. And yep, here you can see our content. And just to, again, kind of take you through what we've done, we'll go to the Rock survey page. And the survey page has the music form on it. And here's the music form data source item. And you can see here the goals and the outcomes multi-list fields, right? So Rick's chosen Rock form submit as the goal and marketing lead as the outcome for the Rock music form. But we want to tell JSS, hey, don't send everything about these items, just send the IDs, because that's what it does by default. It sends everything. So all we have to do is go and dig through like 15 layers of Helix stuff. And we can go to the music form rendering, right? And we can actually control what data Sitecore is going to serve up for that renderings data source. So we'll unprotect this. And the first thing I want to point out is we're not working with controller renderings anymore. JSS actually has a new type of rendering called a JSON rendering that you'll notice. So there's no controller name, there's no action name, just a component name. And this is the name of your component in your JavaScript app. But we'll scroll down a little bit. And one thing that's interesting about these is this new section here, GraphQL. So this actually lets you define a query for this rendering. So when the layout service is serving up the data source for that rendering, it'll apply the transformations here. It's pretty easy to work with. JSS comes with something called the Sitecore Experience Graph Browser. They have to put experience in the name by law, I think.
It's a law, yeah.
Yeah. And this is kind of a playground for you to, figure out how to reshape your data. So you can go in here and it's got autocomplete, which is kind of nice. So you can see, like, what I'm saying is for the data source of the music form, I want to get the genre, the subgenres label, yada, yada, yada. But where it gets interesting is down here on goals and outcomes. So like for the goals, right now I'm telling it I only want target IDs. So if you hit play, we need to provide it a little bit of data first. So if you just hit play whenever you come in to the graph browser, you're not going to get any data, because for these integrated queries to work, it needs to kind of simulate a page request, and you need to provide it with a data source ID and a context item, right? Because it doesn't know what to get the data from. So what we're going to do is we're just going to switch back over to the content editor. We'll go to our rock form, and we're just going to select the path of this data source item. We'll go back, put that there. And then we need to give it a context item as well. And that'll just be the rock survey page. And now when we run it, you can see that we're actually getting data as if the layout service were serving up data for this page and this data source. And this is what it looks like. But you can see down here at goals and outcomes, we're just getting the target IDs. It's like, well, what if you wanted to supply some other data? I don't know GraphQL. Rick doesn't know GraphQL. You probably don't know GraphQL. But this graph browser makes it pretty easy with autocomplete. You kind of just come in here and easily edit it, right? So it's like, well, we want to show the display name of our goals. So you can just select that. Or let's see, if you want to get the target items, you can select that and then start, saying, hey, I want to see if my goal has children, or I want to see the display name of my goal, or whatever, right? It's pretty easy. It's got autocomplete, kind of like Visual Studio, and then you can run this, and there you go, right? So now for my rock form submit goal, you can see that it doesn't have children, and this is the icon that Rick checked. And then once you're done, and once you're like, okay, I like this data, I like the way that this is shaped, I want to actually use this, there's no save button here, you'll notice. So you actually have to copy this entire query and then come back over to your rendering in Sitecore and paste it into the GraphQL field. So just kind of keep that in mind. But once you do that, you're done, right? So your layout service is going to start serving the data up like that. And this is pretty cool. So this is one use case for GraphQL in Sitecore. I think this is the one that probably most of us are going to run into first. You can do other crazy things like define your own GraphQL endpoints and get any kind of data you want out of Sitecore, but this is the most basic, easy one, and this is the one that I ran into first. So, yep, that's GraphQL. What's next, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, and I just have to reiterate how awesome I think that is to have Sitecore, especially right in the content editor and the system editor, to have the open graph browser, the XGraph browser. Just it feels a little ahead of the curve, as opposed to perhaps there being an XSLT application. So it's nice to see that piece. But okay, so let's go back to the guidepost here and let's kind of look at what we've accomplished again. So we came in through that campaign. We had some taxonomy applied to that, so we learned a little bit about you immediately. But we took you then through the form, and again, let's go back to when you first joined us today. Going through that website probably didn't take you, and the data will show this, probably less than a minute, but we're gathering, what campaign you chose, some information around, based on the taxonomy we set up, a little bit about, the environment in which you chose that, and then we had you fill out a form. So let's kind of take a look at what we see in the experience profile from that. So we'll refresh this, and
there we have a bunch. Wow.
Look at that. So This is great. Thank you for all of your participation here. This is fantastic. So I mean, just look at this page alone. We have certainly some engagement value based on goals and engagement value that are applied, and the value per visit and the duration. So again, 1 second visit duration, and how long ago that happened. And if you click into any one of these, you can start to see just how much data we can glean from your activity through the timeline, through the overview. You'll see the pattern matches, you'll see the campaign that was triggered, goals and visits. It's very clean, concise data. And imagine this over time with multiple visits and several people and being able to really dig in. On the profiling tab, you'll start to see patterns that were triggered. This usually takes a second to load, but even in the timeline up where Corey is looking, you can see that the campaign that was fired, the time on site, and then you can see the errors that were achieved. So you can see that you're a marketing lead now. All of these things happen because as a marketer, I set up parameters, like the outcomes help define the eras. The profiling and the pattern matches were set up in the marketing control panel. But again, this is just off of one short piece of, short moment in time with a single visitor, and that's what we're looking at, is that individual visitor. Imagine as you keep coming back, how we start to gain information, all again, running on JSS. One other area that we wanted to kind of make more complete, and as Corey kind of flicks through a few people here, you'll notice a very colorful robot icon on the right-hand side, or maybe not so colorful in some cases.
There he is.
Or a photo. Here we go. So
why do you have my photo?
so this is interesting, right? So normally it's the boring gray silhouette, right, that Sitecore provides. Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually show what they always show in the demo, and that is photos? So, Corey, I'll let you go with that one.
Yep. So
fun there.
All I have on you is your email address, and I want to get a picture for you. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, yada yada yada. None of those services will let you look up a picture by an email address for security reasons, which I appreciate. However, WordPress, if you've ever set up a WordPress account and set an avatar on that with your email address, you automatically got subscribed to something called Gravatar.
Yes.
So Gravatar is a service that WordPress has set up that does exactly what I just said. You give it an email address and it gives you an avatar. So Sebastian's got it set up evidently, and so does Alexandru. But what about for people that don't? So you see here, we don't want to see the silhouette. So one of the cool things about Gravatar is that actually whenever you're requesting an image for someone, you can say, hey, if they don't have an image, give me an image called RoboHash. And what this actually does is it takes it basically makes an image hash of your email address and gives you a completely unique image that's consistent anywhere, right? So like if you've ever used Git extensions, you can turn on RoboHash. If this exact same email address shows up in Git extensions, you'll see this exact same picture. And they're all unique, right? Like you're never going to see these. I've never seen these robots before. I'm going to see them again. So that's just kind of a cool thing to kind of spice up the experience editor, because like Rick said, it is really boring whenever you get in here and just see that little like gray avatar. But yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and does it change the functionality or the data that a marketer gets, from Sitecore? No, it doesn't. But what it does do is it excites, the end customer. It gets them feeling like their system is solid, that it's doing what they want it to do, and they feel like the investment that they made in Sitecore is paying off. They're not feeling like
Exactly.
It's incomplete, So that's that completeness, the solution that I promised you I'd repeat. So I mean, again, just a lot of data that we're able to pull through, but now we kind of want to, take this a little further, and we wanted to basically start to use the new marketing automation in Sitecore. So this is similar to their forms tool. It's a drag and drop solution that we built, and so again, got you through a campaign. You filled out a form. You were triggering goals and outcomes all along the way. So when you did complete that form, you became a marketing lead. And so that is an outcome that was basically, that started this automation flow. Then when you went through, there was an opportunity for you to basically change your mind. You could have said, yeah, you know what, I chose country, but I want to switch because maybe I prefer to be R&B today, or that's really, fits me better. So, this is really just to show off, that was really put in there just to show off the automation. And you'll see that that's really a decision point that says yes or no, I did or did not. And on both sides of that, it's the same. You're going to say, did they choose rock? Yes, no. Did they choose country? Yes, no. Did they choose R&B? Yes, no. And so it's all driven by rules, and you're able to build that out. And then on each case, we were able to send an email and add you to a contact list. I could have done this with a single flow, and more complex rules, but why did we split this up, right? Really, I just wanted to divide this up to show the reporting view, because I think this is a fantastic piece about this automation tool. You can at a glance see where people are. So the top number is they are in the state. Bottom number is they've gone through the state. So again, this is small. This is a small amount of people going through in a moment in time. Imagine a marketing automation program that has hundreds of thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of people, and it's an ongoing flow. You can see where people are and migrating through and moving from campaign to campaign and so on and so forth with complex flows. So the ability to do that, and this reporting is near real time. This is, a very, very cool tool to work with. And I only see this getting better, and it's something that can be extended. So it's just, something worth showing off, I think. So one of the elements in here, you'll see that it says send email. In order to kind of take JSS to its to the edge of its usable universe within Sitecore, Corey decided to play with EXM. I tried to pull him off the ledge, but he just wanted to lean and look over. So, we took it to using EXM with JSS, and there was some. And you were able to make it work, Corey.
Yep.
much to the surprise of Cam, but and Sitecore. But why don't you explain that?
Yeah. So I mean, one cool thing about reporting view before I move on to EXM is that we've identified a trend. We've done this presentation like 20 times now. So one thing that we've found is that almost everybody, whenever we do this presentation, is decisive. It's like they just want to put their phone down and they want to hear us talk. It's unbelievable. But they just go straight and submit the form, and they go for rock. Rock is always the winner, and that's exactly what this is, right? So we had one person who was indecisive, and I think it was just me whenever I was testing the site. So
right.
You guys know what you like, you know what you want. Cool.
Developers.
Yeah, so you guys, if you check your email, you should have gotten an email from us, just kind of thanking you for attending, and it would have your preferences. But yeah, I was actually able to build that email using JSS, and it was not so easy. So has anybody done email HTML? I'm not seeing a show of hands.
Jumping for joy.
There was one who's done it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know it's awful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. So, email clients, they haven't caught up with the times. Like whenever you're writing HTML for emails, it's like you're going straight back to 1998 and writing HTML back for IE3 or IE2 or whatever was out then. It's awful. Like you can barely use CSS. You can, but it's tough. And a lot of the layout, idioms that we've kind of learned don't work there. Like if you want to, like that email that was showed that you received, like that one's like 20 nested tables, maybe even 30. It's just absolutely horrible. But I mentioned that to say that JavaScript does not work in email clients, right? And one of the kind of prerequisites of JavaScript services is that you can run JavaScript. So how did I get this thing to work? Well, there is something to keep in mind. The very first request that you make to a site that's running on JSS is actually rendered on the server. So there's a node process that runs that actually can run your JSS application on the server and will generate an HTML document. So the very first request you make to an HTML site or to a site running on JSS is always going to come back with HTML. Whenever you click around the site, those subsequent requests are just JSON data. And that's for SEO purposes, right? Because Google and Bing crawlers, whenever they're crawling your site, they probably don't execute JavaScript. They need to see HTML to actually be able to index your site. So it's an SEO thing, but we can take advantage of that to actually have JSS work with EXM. So whenever EXM is sending an email, the way it works under the hood is it actually makes a request back to an item in Sitecore, renders that item, gets the HTML, and puts that HTML in an email. Okay, well, JSS is already doing that for the first request anyways, so that's basically what I took advantage of. Just built all of these pages in JSS using components, and then whenever EXM runs, it goes, executes, does the server-side render, and sends the email to you in HTML. And you can see here, this is an example of one of the, for any of you who chose country, you've gotten this email. You can see up in my browser, it might be a little bit small for you, that the React developer tools are highlighted. I mean, this is indeed built on JSS. And whenever the experience editor loads, we never know how long. We never know how long that's going to take. Never. I'll prove to you that this is actually experience editor friendly. See, in disconnected mode, there's none of this. None of this waiting. It's just work. No coffee time.
So you're suggesting to go for coffee now, or what?
Yeah, or just leave. I don't know.
Well, it's evening. You can have something harder than coffee.
Right. Yeah.
And you guys will go for lunch?
Hopefully. Yeah, it's 12:30. All right, here we go. I think it's loading. All right, there. Yeah, so you can see that this stuff is actually editable in the experience editor. We can change text.
So I mean, that's that's what EXM is promised, right? That just you can use it in the experience editor just like any other content.
Right.
So.
And it's on JSS, so that's that. All right, so we've got one last thing we want to do, and that's pick a winner. So you guys gave us all of your data, and now we want to crawl that data and send it to marketers so that we can get paid. And one of you guys can be a winner. So I've written a console app that basically that whole site's running up in Azure. I spin up a new Azure instance for this every time we do the presentation. And what this console app does is just going to go use the XConnect APIs to get all the data from the people that submitted the form, and it's going to select a winner from one of you. So we'll run this app. It's dramatic. There were 12 participants.
And we're not really sharing it with anyone when we get deleted.
That was a joke.
Just a few cell providers.
All right, so that's everybody who participated. We've got a winner. All right, Vlad, congratulations.
Spinner.
And he gets a spinner.
Yeah. So we'll tweet this out. Congratulations to you. You have joined a very exclusive club of people that have won this. We'll remove
this being nothing, but yeah.
Right. We'll remove your email address. Don't worry. But yeah, congratulations. Thanks for playing. And yeah, Rick.
Yeah. So really, thank you for having us for this kind of our encore and final presentation. So for the Cluj-Napoca meetup, thank you for having us. I'm happy we got to do this one more time with Corey. So I appreciate you having us and letting us show off the power of JSS.
Yep, thank you. And we also want to give a big shout out to a friend of ours, Raja Ayapseti. He used to work with us at Proficient. And one thing that I didn't have time to talk about is that JSS actually allows you to start running your sites on Docker. And for this presentation, I was like, let's go big or let's go home. So that site was actually running on Docker. You guys didn't interact with the CD at all or a CM server. You were working against a Docker container. And this gentleman here was actually the one who helped me set that up. So big thanks to him. And we've got a few minutes for questions if anybody has any.
Yes. And in Sitecore, did you do anything so you can hook it with the React application?
Mm-hmm.
You make it, I don't know, to be available all the content in JSON or just some configs and that's it?
So you asking, like, whenever you create content in Sitecore, is the data going to be available as JSON out of the box, or?
Yeah, content and templates and yeah, how will that be available for your React application?
So I can show you. Let's see if. So this is still running in disconnected mode, but it looks exactly the same in Sitecore. If we, I think it's one of these right here. Yep, here. This is what the data looks like. So this is just kind of the default format in Sitecore. You can see that it comes out, and like, yeah, this is it. Like it comes, it lists all the placeholders on your page. It lists any fields for the item, so the page title, right? Pick your style. You can see up here, and then each of your components, like for example, the header component just gets its part of the JSON. So the header component is just going to get this, and you can work against all this stuff here. And like inside of your React component, you can get the fields for that component. You can get the data source. I mean, you can also get access to all this other stuff, but like kind of by default, each of the components is just supposed to consume the data available to its data source.
Yeah, and all these are renderings in Sitecore, simple,
Yes.
and that's the placeholder, and then this is how you see the data. Okay.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
The experience editor, do you use the same code for all the components or?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I didn't do anything special for the experience editor. I just built it out and it just works. So JSS, like kind of the way that MVC has, I think it's sitecore.field that you can use in your views. JSS also has components like image, rich text, et cetera, et cetera. And when you use those components, that has intelligence behind it for the experience editor so that it'll correctly, render your components or your fields based on when you're in the experience editor or when you're just in regular content delivery mode.
And JSS for SXA is also coming.
Yep, that's right. So in the current version, there's no support for SXA with JSS. So you can have them kind of both installed in the same site with caveats, but you can't use them together. In 9.2, they're fixing that. So you'll have JSS support in SXA, which, yay.
A lot of things are coming in 9.2.
Yeah, 9.2 is a big one.
Yeah. Any more questions from the audience? Apparently not.
All right.
So Corey and Rick, thank you for your cool presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and yeah, really happy that you accepted our invitation to present to our small user group. Yeah, so hope to talk to you soon, and we'll see each other maybe in symposium or in London or wherever we'll have other big user groups.
Can't
Sure.
wait.
Yeah.
See ya.
Guys, thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm happy to visit.